Have you ever noticed how some people seem to move through the world untouched by the weight of others' opinions? They don't bend, they don't perform, they simply exist. And suddenly everyone becomes drawn to them, almost magnetically. Now imagine if you stop too. If you stop twisting yourself into shapes that please others, if you chose your own opinion of yourself instead of begging for theirs, self-acceptance instead of the endless performance, what do you think would happen? That's where the truth lies. When you stop begging for approval, emotionally, socially, psychologically, the world around you goes into crisis because people are used to controlling you through your need for their validation, through your fear of their rejection, through your desperate predictability. But the day you choose to stop performing, the game changes. And those who thought they had you figured out realize they know absolutely nothing about who you really are. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." Now think about this. When you stop seeking their approval, who really gets desperate? Who gets irritated? Who tries to make you feel guilty just to get you back into your old role? This reveals more about the other than about you, and it mainly reveals how much you've been puppeteered without realizing it. You keep bending yourself to please, to keep the peace, to not lose people who deep down were never really yours. And with every fake smile, every betrayal of your truth, every performance of who they want you to be, you give away a piece of your soul. And at the end of the day, what's left? Exhaustion, bitterness, a void you can't name. But I'll tell you why. Because you're too desperate for the approval of those who don't deserve even a second of your authentic self. This video is not about becoming cold. It's about choosing yourself. It's about learning what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, real, complete. And this process begins when you understand that your own approval can be stronger than 1,000 external validations. That detachment from their opinions, when it comes from awareness and not from wounds, is an act of power. So I ask you now, looking into your eyes, how long will you continue to be a slave to their judgments? How long will you dance like a puppet every time someone questions whether you're good enough? Maybe it's time to cut those strings, to stop performing, to become unknowable to those who demand your conformity. Because when you stop chasing approval, everything changes. You have been trained from birth to perform, to seek validation constantly, to please, to say yes even when no was screaming inside you. Since childhood, you have been conditioned to believe that your worth lives in how well you meet their expectations. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this brutality. This approval addiction is not love. It is a cage. And as long as you continue to think that you need their validation to be worth something, emotionally or otherwise, you will be used, drained, and thrown away the moment you stop being useful. Do you know why? Because chasing approval makes you predictable, and everything that is predictable becomes a tool. People start to use you as an emotional validation dispenser. They press you when they want affirmation, relief, agreement, and then they forget you exist. But you don't see this because you are trapped in an illusion. That if you seek everyone's approval hard enough, someone will finally truly see you. But it doesn't work that way. Carl Jung spoke about the persona, this mask we wear to be accepted, loved, valued. And it is exactly this mask that keeps you desperately seeking approval. You say, "I'm fine," when you're drowning inside. You change your opinions immediately, even when you know your truth. You apologize, explain yourself, defend yourself, as if you owe the world a justification for existing. But the truth is that the more you put their opinions at the center of your life, the more you disappear from your own story. Chasing approval all the time is a subtle form of self-abandonment. It is a disguised way of avoiding rejection, controlling their perception, trying to manipulate what they think of you. But this control comes at a price, and the price is your soul, It is your life force being handed out as if it were infinite, when in fact it is limited, devastatingly limited. People who demand your constant compliance don't actually want you. They want what you provide. Validation, agreement, a mirror for their ego, emotional comfort. But when you change, when you set a limit, when you refuse to perform, those same people turn on you, accuse you, say you've become difficult. It's not because you changed, it's because you stopped being a useful puppet for them. And here's the cruelest point. The more desperately you chase approval, the less value others give you. Because what is too available becomes emotional garbage. No one respects what they don't have to earn. No one values the person who's always performing for their acceptance. So now stop and think. Who truly deserves your real self? Who deserves your vulnerability, your truth, your unfiltered soul? Or better yet, whose approval should you stop chasing right now? But before answering that, we need to understand one essential thing. Why do we crave their validation so desperately? Why do we give in so easily? What is behind this almost compulsive need to be approved, accepted, praised? The answer lies in what Carl Jung called libido. Not sexual energy, but life force itself. And that is what we will talk about in the next part. Because your life force is all you have. And if you don't learn to protect it, someone will drain it dry. If this content is hitting you in the chest, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Carl Jung did not see the human psyche as a machine that begs for approval without consequences. For him, our mind is like an energy system, and every thought, emotion, and action consumes a part of that energy. The question is, are you choosing where your life force goes, or are you letting the world suck it dry? Every time you chase approval impulsively, you are bleeding psychic energy. When you defend yourself against a judgment that didn't even deserve attention, when you twist yourself just to earn someone's acceptance, when you engage in worthiness competitions, when you perform for people who will never be satisfied, you are spending your inner strength on what does not feed you. And Jung was clear. That which you chase endlessly enslaves you. The more you seek approval, the tighter the chains become. People who live emotionally bankrupt are not weak. They are misdirected. And do you know what happens to someone who lives drained? They become prey. And when you are prey, you become easy meat. Narcissists, energy vampires, and emotional parasites can smell this from miles away. They notice that you don't know how to guard your life force, that you're always seeking validation, that you're constantly trying to prove you're enough, and they feed on it ruthlessly. Jung said that a healthy psyche is one that knows how to keep energy within the system. This means knowing how to say no without collapsing in guilt, knowing how to exist without needing constant praise, knowing how to observe before bending. Because true power is not in seeking approval. It is in choosing when and how to reveal yourself. And this is only possible when you know yourself well enough to recognize your own validation hunger. How many times have you lost sleep over whether someone approved of your choices? How many times have you spent hours replaying what you could have done differently to earn their acceptance, or trying to understand why they withheld their validation? This is energy being drained without return. You are keeping alive ghosts that should have died long ago, feeding dynamics that only exist because you insist on performing. Psychic energy is like a force field. When well guarded, it creates presence. You enter a room and people feel you without you saying a word. But when poorly managed, you become invisible, desperate, needy, and the world has no mercy for those who beg for approval. Therefore, start observing your own triggers. What makes you immediately seek validation? What makes you lose your center? These are the exact points where your energy escapes, and that is where you need to work. Not to become heartless or indifferent, but to be selective, to be sovereign over yourself. And here comes one of Jung's greatest revelations. When you stop chasing approval, you shatter the projections that others place upon you, And that disturbs people deeply, because now we are entering dangerous territory, that of invisible manipulation. In the next part, we will explore how parasitic people feed off your approval seeking and why your validation independence completely destroys these games. Get ready to see the faces of those who have always drained you without you realizing it. You think you are in control. You believe your need for approval is your own choice. But the truth is darker. Most of your validation seeking is programmed conditioning. And those who understand this manipulate you like a puppet. Parasitic people don't need to raise their voices, threaten, or create obvious conflicts. They just pull your insecurity strings and you perform. Always. Carl Jung called this projection, the psychological mechanism through which people project onto others what they cannot see in themselves. But there is another side to this phenomenon that few notice. While others project onto you, you also become the screen for their movies. And the more desperately you seek approval, the more you become a blank canvas for their projections. You know that family member who only validates you when you obey, that partner who only praises you when you're serving their needs, that friend who only supports you when it benefits them. None of this is by chance. They are not relating to you. They are relating to the idea of you, to the role you agree to play. And why do you agree? Because you are terrified of their disapproval, terrified of not being loved, terrified of being abandoned. The most effective manipulation doesn't happen in screaming matches. It happens in the silence of guilt. When you feel that you must earn love, when you believe you need to constantly prove yourself, need to perform, need to bend, even when it's killing you inside. And here is the central point. The manipulator doesn't need to control you directly. They just need you to keep chasing their approval predictably. But when you stop performing, the manipulation collapses. When you start refusing to bend, responding with indifference to their judgments, detaching instead of explaining yourself, the projections begin to crumble. The mask they put on you falls, and this leaves people unsettled because they no longer know who you are. And worse, now they are forced to look at themselves. And not everyone can handle that mirror. Your validation independence is a threat because it forces others to face their own emptiness. The self-approval you embody reveals the internal inadequacy they don't want to see. And then comes the attack, the guilt tripping, the emotional drama, the accusations. Not because you are wrong, but because you stopped serving as their puppet. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you withdraw your need for approval, when you stop feeding the cycle, the other person's shadow begins to emerge. And this is unbearable for those who have always used your neediness as their control mechanism. But what about you? Are you ready to deal with the discomfort of being disapproved of, rejected, or even hated for protecting yourself? Are you ready to endure the loneliness that comes after the rupture? Because it is precisely in that loneliness that a new kind of power is born. And that is what we will talk about now. In the next part, you will understand why self-approval can be the most devastating weapon of the human psyche, and how it completely changes the dynamic between you and the world. The modern world is a screaming match. Everyone wants to be validated, wants approval instantly, wants to win meaningless competitions, and prove they're enough, even if it costs them their own soul. But there is a power that few know, and even fewer master. The power of self-approval. Not the approval of arrogance or narcissism, but conscious, strategic, brutally honest self-acceptance. The kind of self-validation that is not emptiness, but radical wholeness. Jung saw self-approval not as selfishness, but as psychological maturity. When you stop seeking external validation, you begin to observe clearly. And by observing, you see patterns that previously went unnoticed. Emotional dependencies, manipulation games, cycles of self-betrayal. Self-approval allows for lucidity, and lucidity is dangerous for those who live to control you. Have you noticed how some people panic when you stop seeking their approval? When you don't explain yourself, when you simply exist without their validation? It's not because they miss you, it's because your self-sufficiency takes away their control. While you seek their approval, you're still in their game. But when you validate yourself, you change the rules. And that unbalances anyone who thrives on your neediness. True self-approval is not delusion. It is mastery over your own worth. It is the refusal to be dragged down by someone else's judgment. It is the conscious choice not to engage in worthiness battles that are not worth your soul. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires this distancing, because only in self-validation can you listen to yourself without the world's interference. But don't be fooled. Self-approval has a price. It will distance you from people who only valued you for your compliance. It will make you incomprehensible to those who only saw you through their projections. It will make you seem selfish, arrogant, cold. But all of this is a reaction from those who never wanted to deal with your depth, only with your usefulness. And here is the hard truth. The more you mature, the less you need their approval, because you understand that each moment of validation seeking is an energetic bleeding, and not everyone deserves access to your worth. Sometimes self-approval is not isolation, it is sovereignty. It is the language of those who no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Self-approval is uncomfortable for others because it forces them to deal with their own self-rejection, with their own internal wounds, and this discomfort reveals more about them than any argument of yours could reveal. You don't need to explain your self-acceptance. It explains itself, and those who feel threatened by it reveal how much they depended on your insecurity to maintain their own control. But the most powerful self-approval is not the one that disturbs others. It is the self-validation that rebuilds you from within, the self-acceptance that connects you to something beyond their opinions. It is in this internal space, free from their demands, that you begin to recover your life force, to reconnect with your essence. And this is precisely what we will talk about in the next part, because it's not enough to just reject their approval. You need to relearn how to use your energy consciously, to choose where it goes, where it stays, and most importantly, where it should never be wasted again. It's time to learn to be selective with your own soul. It's no use understanding all of this intellectually if in practice you continue saying yes when you mean no, seeking validation from people who drain you, participating in performative relationships, and maintaining connections that only exist out of fear. Awareness without action is just another form of self-betrayal. True transformation begins when you firmly decide to become selective, and this requires emotional discipline. Conscious validation. Independence is not about being cold, arrogant, or indifferent. It's about no longer being a puppet for anyone at any time for any reason. It's about taking control of your own worth, your own truth, your own peace. And this starts with small actions, not seeking immediate reassurance, breathing before bending, leaving a situation before being dragged into performance, turning off your phone without guilt, saying I don't need your opinion, saying I'm not interested in your judgment, saying I won't perform. But here's the most important part. You don't need to justify your self-validation. You don't need to explain your independence. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself. And this, for many people, is unforgivable. Because when you refuse to explain your worth, you take away the other person's power to keep you within an emotional narrative where you are always the accommodating, understanding, approval-seeking puppet. Carl Jung understood that every process of individuation goes through isolation, but not depressive isolation, sacred isolation, a time of inner retreat where you relearn to validate yourself without the world's interference, where you rebuild your identity, not based on their opinions, but from your own center, Want to know a good thermometer for your evolution? Observe who starts to distance themselves from you when you stop seeking their approval. Observe who tries to guilt-trip you when you stop performing. Observe who accuses you of being selfish when you finally start to protect your worth. These are not signs that you are wrong. They are proof that you have begun to free yourself. Stopping the approval chase is uncomfortable at first. You will feel guilty. You will think you are being selfish. You will hear that you are being too harsh. But this is part of the liberation process. You have spent your life being conditioned to put their opinions above your own knowing. It's natural that change causes discomfort, not only in you, but in everyone who benefited from your old version. Conscious validation. Independence is the foundation of freedom. When you say no to their approval, you are saying yes to yourself. When you withdraw from a toxic need for validation, you are reaffirming that your peace is worth more than any false acceptance. And when you stop explaining yourself, you begin to be respected, even if it's by only a few people who actually matter. But not everyone is ready for this type of presence, because your approval independence will expose wounds they do not want to face. It will reveal how much they depended on your neediness to feel superior. And it is at this moment that the rupture comes. And with the rupture comes the pain, the loneliness, the estrangement, the feeling that you are losing something when in fact you are just cutting the puppet strings. But what happens after that? What comes after the detachment? What is born from the self-validation? In the last part, we will talk about this, about the rebirth that only happens when you have the courage to be disapproved of, to be alone, and to become whole on your own. It's time to understand why the loneliness of the self-validated is the path to true freedom. When you stop chasing approval from everyone, something profound begins to happen. First comes the silence, an uncomfortable silence that seems to scream inside you. You wonder if you did the right thing, if you are being too selfish, if you are losing people who cared about you. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins to cleanse, to calm, to heal. And then comes solitude. But not the solitude of abandonment. It is the solitude of total presence, your own, the solitude of the strong, the solitude of one who no longer betrays themselves to keep others comfortable. And in that space where there was once confusion, clarity enters. Where there was once anxiety, peace enters. Where there was once desperate neediness, a new kind of strength enters. The strength of being whole within yourself. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, becoming who you really are, requires you to distance yourself from the collective, that you strip away the mask, that you walk alone for a while. And that is exactly what you are doing when you decide to stop chasing approval. You are not fleeing the world, you are returning to yourself. It is at this point that you stop being a performer and become a creator. You cease to be shaped by their judgments and begin to shape your reality from within. The people who feel uncomfortable with your independence, they reveal that they never wanted you. They wanted the role you played, and now that you no longer fit, they don't know what to do with you, and that is liberation. You will lose people, but you will find yourself. You will distance yourself from places, but you will reconnect with your essence. You will become misunderstood, but finally, you will begin to be respected. Because when you are no longer desperate for approval, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. And don't be fooled. This is a rebirth, a new beginning. The start of a life where you are no longer available for emotional crumbs, for manipulation games, for emptiness disguised as connection. Now you only accept what resonates with your peace, with your truth, with your wholeness. The person you become on the other side of this transformation is someone the old you wouldn't recognize. Someone who walks into rooms without needing to prove anything. Someone who speaks their truth without checking if others agree. Someone who sits in silence without filling it with performance. Someone who exists fully without apology. This is not arrogance. This is integration. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of becoming whole. Not perfect, not superior, but complete. When you stop fragmenting yourself to fit into others' expectations, when you stop betraying your truth for their comfort, when you stop performing for their validation, all those scattered pieces of your soul come back home. And here's what nobody tells you about this journey. The loneliness you fear is temporary, but the wholeness you gain is permanent. The people you lose were never holding the real you anyway. They were holding a performance, a mask, a version of you that existed only to serve their needs. When that performance ends, the real connections begin. Not with everyone, not with many, but with the few who can actually see you. These are the people who don't need you to be smaller, who don't require your constant validation seeking to feel secure, who can sit with your strength without feeling threatened, who celebrate your independence instead of punishing it. These connections feel different because they're built on truth, not need, on respect, not control, on choice, not fear. But you cannot attract these people while you're still performing. You cannot find authentic connection while you're still begging for approval. The frequency of desperation attracts parasites. The frequency of wholeness attracts equals. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that the path to authentic relationship passes through the valley of solitude, that you must first become whole alone before you can truly connect with another. That self-approval is not the end of love. It is the beginning of real love, the kind that doesn't diminish you, that doesn't require you to abandon yourself, that doesn't feed on your emptiness. So if you have made it this far, it's because a part of you is already ready for this new path. A part of you has already understood that being approved of means nothing if for that you have to disappear, and that true self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it costs you everything you thought you needed. The world will call this selfish. Let them. The people who benefited from your self-abandonment will call this arrogant. Let them. Those who fed on your approval-seeking will call this cold. Let them. Because you are no longer living for their comfort. You are living for your truth. And the beautiful, terrifying, liberating reality is this. When you stop chasing approval, you discover that you never needed it in the first place. What you needed was your own validation, your own acceptance, your own love. Everything else was just noise keeping you from hearing the only voice that ever mattered, your own. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even hated in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of being you? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I choose myself. Let's see how many here are ready for this transition. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.